everyone. We are going to go ahead and get started. Tom is having technical difficulties, so hopefully he'll be joining us soon. But this is the Technical Assistance webinar for the Specialty Crop Research Initiative. And this is for the request for pre-applications. So I see Megan here, so I'll introduce myself and Tom, and then Megan, I'll pass it over to you to introduce yourself. So Tom and I are the national program leaders for this program. So you'll be hearing from us, and you'll also hear from Megan. Megan, you can go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. Little technical difficulty here as well, but thanks. Glad everyone could make it. And just as a quick reminder before we get started that you'll be able to see a recording of this in the same place where you registered, probably by tomorrow.
So as Megan noted, this webinar is going to be recorded. Make sure your microphone is muted, although I think since this is a webinar, you are automatically muted, and we have to give you the option to talk. If you have any questions while we are giving this presentation, you can go ahead and type those into the Q&A feature. We take discrimination very seriously here, so anyone wishing to file a complaint can use the phone number, fax number, or postal mailing address listed on this slide. This slide also has contact information for individuals with disabilities to request reasonable accommodations. Language access services will be provided to limited English proficiency individuals upon request. So today we're going to give you a brief NIFA overview, as well as an overview of the SCRI program. We'll talk about the details of the pre-application RFPA, the evaluation process, and additional information and resources. So I'll get us started with an overview of the National Institute of Food and Agriculture, which is commonly referred to as NIFA. NIFA was created through the Food Conservation and Energy Act of 2008, also known as the Farm Bill, with the mission of investing in and advancing agricultural research, education, and extension to solve societal challenges, and the vision of catalyzing transformative discoveries, education, and engagement to address agricultural challenges. We're the federal partner of the land-grant university system, and we support initiatives that ensure the long-term viability of agriculture. We also provide funding and strategic leadership for programs that make sure groundbreaking discoveries are reaching the people who need to know about them to put the findings into practice. NIFA covers a broad array of program areas. I won't go through all of these individually, but you can see there's a wide breadth. A lot of programs touch on several of these at once, including SCRI, which brings us to our next topic area, an overview of the Specialty Crop Research Initiative. Let me just check if Tom is logged
Tom is on the list now, Jessica.
Great. I am going to promote him to panelist so that he can cover this topic. All right, Tom, you are now a panelist. You can go ahead and unmute and take it from here.
All right. Thanks, Jessica. So even though we've been doing this Zoom dance for years now, I had all kinds of trouble logging into the program this afternoon, and so sorry to be late. Apologize. And you can go just to the next slide. So I'm not going to read a lot of these slides. If you look in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see the page number where this information can be found in the request for pre-applications RFPA. But these are the legislative focus areas that Congress has authorized NIFA to work on through the Specialty Crop Research Initiative. So some of them are very broad and cover a lot of areas, but some of them are more specific. And so but these are our marching orders from Congress, and so this is what we focus on. Next. So what is a specialty crop? I get a lot of questions. Recently had someone ask if oysters were a specialty crop, but specialty crops in the Farm Bill are defined as fruits and vegetables, tree nuts, dried fruit, horticulture, and nursery crops, including floriculture. So that's, it seems like a fairly straightforward definition, but there's a lot of nuances in that. And so we convened a panel from across USDA, all the agencies that deal with specialty crops, and we developed a more detailed description, recognizing that each agency has its own mission. And so there is a slight variation in how each agency deals with specialty crops. But that definition you can link to here. It's also in the more resources page on the SCRI web page on our website. And if you have any trouble finding it, let me know, and I'll be happy to send you this expanded definition. The eligibility for SCRI is very broad. You can see it here. Pretty much everyone who has the capacity to do research and extension is eligible to apply for SCRI funding. Some organizations don't have capacity for a lot of times extension, but you can get that through partnering. And so if you have if any of your partners are one of these entities, you are also eligible to apply. Next. Yeah. So for the project and grant types, and again, RFPA page 11 to 13, we have 3 project types within SCRI: planning projects, standard research and extension projects, and coordinated agricultural projects. The application type is either new or resubmitted. So there are a lot of other application types that other programs consider, but in SCRI, these are the only 2 that we are considering this year. And I'll get into a more description on the project types in the next few slides. One of the things I want to point out, this is in the RFA on page 7. SCRI takes a systems approach to addressing specialty crop challenges, and sustainability is the foundation of everything that we fund in SCRI. So that's what this diagram is supposed to illustrate: sustainability around the outside, supporting the entire program, and then the systems approach. We view it as 3 primary systems: the production system, the distribution and processing system, and then the consumer and market system. And so we want to, really, if we had our druthers, all of our projects would address the total system. But we do also entertain projects that address one or more of these primary systems. So the standard research and extension project type, you see it outlined here. Project period is up to 5 years. The budget normally will not exceed $1 million per year, and requests less than $250,000 per project are discouraged. We really want to focus on addressing challenges in a holistic, systems approach, and those projects tend to be more complex and have larger budgets. So we have funded some smaller projects in the past, but that is not what we're focused on currently. The purpose of we call them SREPs, is to support targeted problem-solving efforts that wouldn't qualify in scope as a coordinated agricultural project, or CAP. We have done statistical analysis since 2008, and you'll see our stats here, descriptive stats. We expect that most SREP projects will be around the median, the historical median. So that's $2.18 million per project. So it can be 4 years, it can be 5 years. It depends on what you think you can accomplish based on the objectives that you select. A little bit more detail on the SREP project. Um, so I don't think I can advance them, can I, Jessica?
No, you can't. Sorry, you froze for me for a second.
Oh, sorry. Okay. So for SREPs, pre-applications have to bring together both research and extension components. Uh, and there's an expectation that an advisory panel will be formed to inform the project throughout its life, including the identification and prioritization of research and extension objectives. So this is, if you go to the next slide, Jessica, in that diagram that I showed you, this is the SREP is what you see as focused science and application studies. So all of these things around the outside, and I don't know if you can see my cursor, but so on the production side, plant development, genetics, physiology, harvest, all of those things would be, components of an SREP project. On the next slide, again, this is on the diagrams on page 7. The CAP projects are described on page 11 of the RFA. Again, project period up to 5 years. Federal funds not to exceed $2 million per year. And it's specifically to address multiple components of a primary system or multiple components of areas where primary systems overlap. And I'll show you that figure again just to illustrate that. Based on our statistical analysis, the median award, if you go back one, is about $5.8 million. So that's kind of the ballpark where we expect most caps to come in. Now, well, just to more fully describe what caps are, these are larger projects awarded to consortia or groups of applicants to address multiple components of a primary system, an entire primary system, or problems that cut across primary systems. And with the expectation that the project will make significant contributions to the sustainability of the system or system component. So they're really intended to bring together diverse teams where each member of the team has a piece of the solution, and by collaborating, the entire solution can be visualized and brought to completion. And so that's really differentiates it from what an SREP is, or an SREP may be that you don't really have all the pieces of the solution, and so you need to do something additional in order to get all those pieces and then pull it together and bring it to a completion. And then so you can see on this diagram, the caps would be either a whole primary system or in those areas where the primary systems overlap. And the ideal cap would be in the total system approach. Okay. So research and extension planning projects, these are described on pages 12 and 13 of the request for pre-applications. It's a 1-year project period, $50,000 maximum. And there's really 2 types of activity that planning projects are intended to support. One is to provide assistance to applicants for the development of a future SREP or CAP. We call those grant planning projects, or to provide assistance to groups for the development of strategic research and extension plans, which include goals, priorities. So basically a strategic planning activity. The expectation is that these plans that are developed through that activity could provide the relevant basis for future SCRI grant applications. So I get a lot of questions. I've had questions, probably about 20 questions this week about matching. Yeah, and it's only Tuesday, so it's really been a lot of people have been asking. So SCRI was first authorized in 2008, and there was a requirement for matching funds, dollar for dollar of non-federal funds. In the 2014 Farm Bill, NIFA was given the authority to waive the matching requirement if certain conditions were met. And then in the 2018 Farm Bill, that matching requirement was reinstated, but through the appropriations process, NIFA has been given the authority to waive the matching requirement in appropriations. So we're currently under a continuing resolution, which means we have the same authorities that we had last fiscal year. And so we still have that waiver authority. And NIFA has determined that if Congress gives us the waiver authority, we will use it. So we will not require matching. If we get a new, so that's on the next slide, it says, uh, distracted. No match, but stay tuned, right? Anything can happen. Congress should decide to pass a year-long continuing resolution. That would mean we would have the same authorizations that we had last year, no matching. If Congress passes a new appropriations bill, the authorization to waive the matching would have to be in that new bill. And so we'll see if we get a new appropriations. They could change the matching requirement in a new farm bill, but we don't anticipate a new farm bill anytime in the near future. We currently are, I think we have an extension until September of 25. So, they've given themselves a lot of time to work on the farm bill. If we do get a new appropriation, the budget office will notify us within days of whether or not we have the authority to waive the match, and we'll get that information to you as quickly as we possibly can. And I see Jessica's on camera, so I'm assuming that she's up next, and there you go.
Yep. So now we're going to dig into the details of the pre-application. So we've made some changes from prior years, so we really want to highlight those. First of all, we're requesting an executive summary for the pre-application, which is new. We used to only request those for the full applications. So here's what we request that you put in the executive summary for the SREP and CAPS, as well as a link to a template that you can use to put it together. That QR code goes to the template, and with all the information that we're presenting here, you can also find it in the PRFA or RFPA. Last year, we reduced the page maximum for SREP and CAP project descriptions to 6 pages. That's still in effect this year. These are the things that you should focus on in your project description. As I mentioned, they're also listed in the RFPA, so I'm not going to read through all of them, but pay attention to what your description should focus on. For SREPs and CAPs, you get 4 appendices. They are listed here and in the RFPA, but there are 2 important things that I want to point out. One is that you are not allowed additional appendices. This is it, and you need to stick to the page limits for the appendices that have them listed. The other thing that I want to note is that you're going to need to combine these PDFs with your project description into a single PDF file, because the application package in grants.gov does not allow you to attach multiple files. You'll notice that the bio appendices is limited to 7 pages. So what we want in the pre-application is not your 20-page CV. We just want a short bio. So this is Tom's short bio. He could obviously spend dozens of pages detailing his illustrious career, but he stuck to a short paragraph, just letting the reviewers know where he works and what his specialty is. So this is what we're looking for. All right, so if you're submitting a planning project, we also now require an executive summary. Here are the things we require in that summary and a link to the template that you can use to build that summary. And here is what we require in the planning grant project description. Note that the page limit for planning projects is 3 pages. So be concise. You should not include a logic model for planning projects. So you're only allowed to have 3 appendices. And again, you have to combine these into a single file with your project description. Here are just some reminders when it comes to pre-applications. Again, don't include a logic model for planning projects. Those should only be included for SREP and CAP applications. For the appendix with your letters of support, we highly recommend including a list of everyone who provided letters of support along with the actual letters. That is really organizationally helpful for reviewers who are going to be reading each of the letters in your pre-application. Do not include responses to previous relevance reviewers or citations, cover letters, detailed budgets, or budget narratives. And this isn't a suggestion. We don't allow them in the pre-applications because it could pose an unfair advantage for those who do include them, even though they're not allowed. So don't put them in. Okay, so where can you find the RFPA? It's available on our website under the Funding Opportunities section. There is a deadline of 5 p.m. Eastern Time on November 8th, 2024, and the pre-application needs to be submitted through grants.gov. We are really strict with the deadline, so get your pre-applications in early, especially if you've never submitted one before. Grants.gov can be difficult to navigate. You might get error messages if your attachments are in the wrong format. Basically, give yourself time to find the potential errors and fix them so you're not scrambling at 4:59 p.m. to convert a Word document into a PDF. We also put in some other basic information about the program on this slide. This information, like everything else we're presenting, is also in the RFPA. I think I accidentally clicked the link here. All right. I noted you have to submit through grants.gov. NIFA only accepts electronic application submissions now. We can't accept paper applications. We have a link here to our grants application guide. This is also in the RFPA. Look at this document, even if you've submitted before, because it has a lot of important information in it. We get a lot of questions that are directly answered in this document, so check it out. Also, all of your application documents must be in PDF format. And this is really important to know because grants.gov will let you upload a Word document, but the NIFA system won't process it. So on our ends, it shows up as an error. So you have to make sure to convert all of your documents to PDF format, or they're not going to be included in your application. So Tom, I'm going to pass it back to you to talk about the proposal evaluation process.
All right, now remember to unmute myself, so I feel really confident here. If you put stuff in the chat, I can't respond to you in the chat, and so I would ask Peter James to send me an email, and we can chat about your questions offline. Because I want to answer your questions, but I can't do it in the chat. And they're really complex, so it's going to take more than a couple minutes. So here we go, proposal evaluation process. And this is really important because this is how you're successful in the pre-application phase. So if you go to the next slide, here's a diagram that shows the various steps in the pre-application process. You can find the process on page 20 of the RFPA. So we sort the pre-applications into panels of related crops or topics, and our goal is to have 9 reviewers per panel. The reviewers produce the individual reviews for each application, and they evaluating the relevance to industry challenges. And they use the evaluation criteria, which are also in the RFPA, and we'll get to that in a little while. The reviewers use a matrix that we've created to help them to sort the pre-applications into high priority, medium priority, and low priority. And then we discuss the individual results in an online meeting that generally lasts an hour and a half to 2 hours. Through the discussions, the relevance panels decide which pre-applications are invited to submit full applications. So they make the decision, not us. We just make sure that they apply the evaluation criteria evenly across all the pre-applications so that everyone gets a fair review. So again, major change here on the evaluation criteria. Last year, I forget now how many. I think they totaled 20 points. We got a lot of feedback from our reviewers, and they said they wanted to have more room for distinguishing between the relevance categories and also distinguishing between pre-applications. And so we have expanded the value of the criteria, and we've actually expanded the number of criteria. So again, you can find this on page 21. I'm not going to read them, but you'll notice that those criteria with the higher point values are towards the top. And that should tell you something about the relative importance of criterion 1 to criterion 10. So, you have a limited amount of words that you can use in a pre-application. So you want to focus your attention on those criteria that are most important, but don't ignore any of the criteria. They all have to be addressed. On the next slide, and this is for the last one was for the SREPs and CAPs. This slide is for planning projects. Again, you can see the criteria are different. There's a different number of them, but they still, carry point values. And we tell the reviewers that we want them to, that these are where the emphasis should be placed when they do their reviews. Again, because they're planning projects are different than SREPs and CAPs in that they're planning. The criteria are different too. And then there's the page numbers where you can find that 20 and 21. Okay. So here's, I'm going to turn it over now to Megan.
Okay, so here is the timeline for y'all to know what to expect. The pre-application call for pre-applications has been released. Applications are due, I believe it's November 8th. Tom or Jessica, correct me if I misspoke on that one. Then it takes us a few months to get those all set up with the reviewers who we have lined up, and for them to go into our peer review system and do the reviews. And then the result of that is that we will send you a message letting you know if you are invited to submit a full application, and we will let you know one way or the other. If you start hearing that other people have heard something, don't worry, we haven't forgotten you. We're going to notify everybody one way or the other. Sometimes we're waiting for some of our internal pieces to get through. Right, so then when we do send that invitation we'll attach the RFA for the full applications to that, because it's a directed RFA and it won't be published on our website. And at that time, we will give you the deadline and any more information about that process. Next slide. If you, next slide, are looking for some information about what's been funded in the past, here are some places where you could get that information. That it used to be that we drove everybody to CRIS, the CRIS system, which is it's in the process of being retired. You might still be able to look some things up there, so I left the link, but it's on its way out. So the new thing is the Data Gateway, which you can find a link to from the NIFA website, and it's basically It's a lot easier to use than Chris. You can just do a query like you would do in any other database. And I think the next slide shows an image of that. Yep, so that's what it looks like. And the link that was on the previous page it goes to a list of all the projects, but then if you go to Data Gateway, then you can do a query that will drill down if there's a specific crop you're looking for or something like that. Next slide. Okay, here's just some links to some other resources that might be helpful to you. I'm not going to walk through all of these, but funding opportunities. So if you're listening to this or you're reading the RFA and you're saying, well, this doesn't seem to really be a fit, there's a link to the funding opportunities page on the NIFA website, so you can explore and see if there's other programs that might be a better fit. There's a link to a page with information about indirect costs, where there's often a lot of questions. Link to some guidance about completing applications. That last one we should have taken out because that's the old Chris link. But next slide. Okay, so we have a listserv, just basically an email list, and it's pretty much a one-way, so it's not a conversational kind of a listserv, but we tend to send out notices like when the RFPA was published. We sent that when we announced this webinar. So if you would like to be added to that list, you can just send an email to me at this email, and I'll get you added. Next slide. And here's a review of our contact information in case you want to reach out to any of us with questions. And next slide, I think, takes us to questions. And I do have, I've been watching what's happening online, and there's one in the chat that I think is worth addressing right now, which is about including links in the proposal so that reviewers can go to those links to see examples of your AI. Or basically the answer is no. So we ask reviewers to review what's in the application, and we do our planning around that based on how much time it's going to take to review the applications that in the size that they are. If there are a lot of links in there and where they're going to go down a lot of different pathways with those, it can end up taking an extraordinary amount of time for the reviewers to do those reviews. And so we actually ask applicants to not do that.
It could also be viewed as a loophole around the page limits.
Yeah.
You put
exactly.
a lot of information in those
Gives
links.
you an unfair advantage, right?
What you can do is you can kind of describe what's in those pages within the page limits, but you can't do citations in the pre-application, so you can't even cite the link.
Yeah. Okay. So there's some other questions that are in the Q&A. So can you please define sustainability? I don't know, Tom or Jessica, do you want to handle that one?
I want to answer that one live. So
great.
USDA, actually sustainability is defined in legislation, and so if you use a search engine and you with the term USDA definition of sustainability, it will come up. Okay, and that's the definition of sustainability that we use. So it involves, we always talk about a three-legged stool. It involves economic sustainability, environmental sustainability, and what's the other one? Jessica might know. I can't remember right this minute. So that economic, environmental, and social. So all around the food and human system are important, and so it's really how are we going to survive moving forward, and that's really what the definition is focused on.
Tom, I think this last one is probably a good one for you to get, the one about, do you recommend first-time applicants to go for a planning project first?
Well, yeah, that's a great question, and I get that question a lot. I do encourage people to use the planning project vehicle because it allows you, we have a lot of requirements in SCRI that aren't, part of, a lot of grant programs. So the idea that the team has to use a transdisciplinary approach, which is defined in the RFPA, the fact that we use a systems approach, sustainability is our foundation. These are all things that a lot of times we don't consider when we're doing, when we're working independently, when we're working on our own research interests. And so in order to pull those teams together, in order to build a successful project, the planning project is really an excellent vehicle for doing that. So most SCRI applications that get funded are resubmissions, but of those projects that are funded in their first submission, about 70% of those are the result of a planning project. So it really does help you build a successful approach, a successful team. It allows you to interact with stakeholders and make sure that they're at the table from day one, that they're part of your transdisciplinary team, and it's a great opportunity to build that moving forward. Yeah, so the question about formatting guidelines, there are formatting guidelines in the RFPA, 1-inch margins all around, 12-point font, left justified. And we have people that try to use, 0.75 between the lines, and they use 11-point font. The reviewers pick up on that, and it irritates them, right? So you're not going to get a good review if you irritate the reviewer. So follow those guidelines, and you'll not have any problems. So the question about current SCRI recipients who are thinking about going for another round of funding. We actually had one project that was funded, and they got to the end of the project. They wanted to kind of shift gears. It's same topic, but a different approach, and so they got another planning project. And so that has been done, and it certainly is you can do that. Funding rate for planning projects depends on the year, but it's much higher than it is than for SREPs and CAPs. It's generally around 50%, I would say. And our overall rate is about 18 to 20%. So, and that's of full applications, not pre-applications. I guess somebody, Megan or somebody, answered the question about how many pre-applications will we get. Last year we had 164, I think it was. Is that right? Or that was the number of relevance reviewers we had? I think they're about the same. But
I answered it and said between 150 and 200.
Yeah, that's what we get on pretty much historically is 100. We had during COVID, nobody was going to the office, and so we got kind of the number was lower, but it's rebounded. So we're getting more. Are international collaborations allowed? Yes. International partners can get they can't get federal funds directly, but if they're part of a team and you can get money to them as subcontractors. So it's a blurb at the beginning of the RFPA where we talk about international cooperation. We realize the planet is shrinking, and especially with specialty crops, they're global commodities now, and so they're part of the international trade, and really we've had a lot of very successful projects have international collaborations, and they were stronger projects because of it. So there are certain guidelines. The project has to benefit U.S. agriculture. We've had projects submitted where they were going to do the research in a foreign country, and the producers that would benefit were not in the U.S. Those kinds of projects are not allowed, but as long as it benefits U.S. agriculture, international collaborations are encouraged. Number of stakeholder letters typically needed. There is no magic number. It's, you want to make sure that you have all of the principals identified and have letters from them. You'll see in the evaluation, or it's important that the letters be individual. Okay, if you send, you have a lot of people in the industry. You send them all a form letter. They sign the form letter, and you put that in the package. The reviewers look at that. These are all people that are in the industry. They've been engaged for many years, a lot of them, and they look at that and they say, "Yeah, I signed 10 of those last week. It doesn't mean anything." You want the letters to be meaningful. So 5 meaningful letters is better than 25 form letters, and that's really what you want to focus on with the letters. And letters of collaboration are not letters of support. So that's why we kind of differentiated that with separate appendices. And I don't remember hearing Jessica mention it, but in those appendices where you have the letters, if you have like a little list of who provided letters at the beginning, that allows the reviewers to quickly say, oh yeah, those are the people that need to be involved. Then they go look at the letters, and it just helps them do their reviews more efficiently. And remember, these reviewers are, they're involved in the industry, right? So they're working 60 to 80 hours a week already, and now we're asking them to give us more of their time to do these reviews. So the easier we can make it for the reviewers, the more favorable they're going to look at the application. Question about the advisory board. It's better if you have them already identified, or if you don't have actual participants who have agreed to serve on the advisory board, if you can identify the types of people that you want to have on your advisory committee, so that reviewers know that you've given it some thought. It's not perfunctory. You're not just going to throw something together, and just to fulfill a requirement. So it does take time to build those advisory committees and to get people to agree to serve on them. But to have an idea of how many times are you going to meet? Is it annually, biannually, those sort of quarterly, whatever it's going to be, and the kinds of people that would be on that advisory board. As far as letters of collaboration, they don't have to get their institutional approval at this point. That would come in the full application, where they have to, file a current pending support project. Remember that the pre-application process does not result in awards. So we don't require budgets. We don't require budget justifications. And actually those are not allowed. So we already answered that thing about the planning proposals, funding rate. So we have no open questions. If you want to raise your hand, we can.
They're not able to raise their hand.
Oh, they're not?
No, that has to go in the Q&A.
Okay.
You have the power since you're a panelist.
Raise my hand. How about that? So there wasn't, we will make the slides available. This is being recorded, so all of the answers to the questions will also be available. I see one more popped up in the Q&A. Oh. So if you have advisory board members, letters of separation, I would say that you want I would call that a letter of support, because unless the advisory board member is going to be actively engaged in the project, so like maybe a peer-to-peer learning or something like that, they're in support of the project. But just have them indicate in the letter that they have agreed to serve on the advisory board because they really support the project and they think it's important. What is the maximum funding allowed for national labs? Uh, the funding is the same for all applicants, so it doesn't matter whether you're a national laboratory, Department of Energy, whatever. It's the same for everybody. We have no open questions. We went through that pretty quickly. We allotted an hour and a half. We haven't even spent an hour. So either we forgot to say a lot of things, or we're getting really good at this. I don't know. This is not our first rodeo, though, so hopefully we're just getting good at it.
So I'll just mention again, it does take a little bit of time. This will be posted by our communications office. And so once they get the recording, then they will get it posted on the NIFA website on the same page where you went to register for this. So if you don't see it immediately today, look tomorrow, it will be there. So you don't need to write to us and, request that individually, that the recording will be posted there. Typical team size for an SREP, I mean, it varies from 3 to 40.
Yeah.
I mean, depends on what you're doing. But there are very large teams.
And there are smaller teams.
Does the entire team need to be specified for a planning project proposal? Well, at the pre-application stage, no, but you probably would want to have that figured out by the full application if you get invited to submit a full application.
Yeah, the other thing too is a lot of times, particularly for planning projects, the reviewers will say, well, what they have here is adequate, but they really need to add this, they really need to add that. So then in your full application, you're not limited to the same project team that you put in the pre-application. Okay, so and even if it's not recommended by the reviewers, if as you move forward and you're doing during the time between submitting the pre-application and waiting for the results of the relevance review, you say, well, we could add these people and they would bring value. You can make that change in the full application. That is allowable. It says, can international grad students attending U.S. universities without visa work under an exemption? If they're in the United States and they don't have a visa, you don't want them to tell us about it, because we would have to report them.
Hopefully,
so they have some kind of a visa. It's probably a student visa. And if they're a student in the United States, they can be part of a project team, and they, I think we can pay assistantships, we can pay fees, and we can pay them for foreign nationals who are in the United States legally. So we do that. We have some postdocs are supported by SCRI funds who are international because they're here with a visa.
But we are not immigration attorneys, so check anything we say.
Yeah, well, that much I know because I had a lot of international students when I was on the faculty, and as long as, like I said, as long as their visas is in line, there's no problem. So
I'll get that bottom one quickly while you're reading the middle one, Tom. We use the terms pre-application and SRS kind of interchangeably. The pre-application includes some of the other components. But yes, it's basically the narrative component.
right. Jessica was referring to it as the project description. So that, that's basically the stakeholder. And so as limits go, I get this question all the time, like, well, we think we have an SREP, but, we're going to have to request this much money. And so should we apply as a cap? What I always tell people is develop your objectives in concert with your stakeholders and figure out what it's going to take to achieve the objectives. Because at the end of the day, that's what the reviewers are going to look at when you get to the full application part of the process. These are going to be people who are they're actively engaged in science. They know what science costs, and so if you have 4 objectives and you ask for too little money, they're going to say, no way can they do that, right? If there are 3 objectives, they're going to say they don't really need that much money. So you want your budget to accurately reflect the true cost of what it will take to be successful, to successfully achieve your objectives. That's really the driving factor in developing a budget. And so if you're over the mean, or if you're over that expected $1 million for limit for 5 years, then it's not the end of the world, as long as in your budget narrative you can justify why your expenses are more than what is expected. We just don't want we don't want you to add objectives just so that you can increase your budget, right? You want to have objectives that are necessary to achieve your goals, and then you want a budget that are necessary to achieve those objectives.
Peter, I think you should probably email us. The question you posted is pretty specific.
Yeah. So the delineation between a SREP and a cap, there, so in a coordinated agricultural project, this was a concept that was actually started, I guess it was like in 2007 or 2006 by Peter Johnson, who was a veterinarian, and he was involved with the avian influenza outbreak that came about back in those days and was wiping out millions and millions of birds across the United States. And he knew the research community really well. And he said, this person over here has this part of the answer. This person over here is that part. This person, that person. So when they were working individually, no one was going to get to a solution for the avian influenza outbreak because they were working individually. But Peter knew that by bringing them together as a team, they would have the solution. And sure enough, they were able to solve that problem within 2 years. So that's what a CAP is intended to do. It's intended to bring together people who might not necessarily think about cooperating, but because they're addressing the same issue from multiple angles, by working together, they're going to be able to come to a solution within a time that's going to make a real difference for our end users. And that's the bottom line, is service to the end users. So for an SREP, that's a situation where stakeholders have identified an issue, and it might be a newer issue, right? Or it might be a challenge that no one has really considered in the past. And so you really you need to do some more, I won't call it preliminary work, but you need to develop more of a foundation knowledge so that then you can do the translational studies to make solutions happen. So that's really the way that I differentiate an SREP and a CAP.
And if you look in the RFPA, one of the things that it really it talks about the primary system that Tom talked about in the presentation. So this is what it says in the RFPA, is that SREPs deal with the overall sustainability of a primary system or one or more of its components, while CAPs deal with multiple components of a primary system, an entire primary system, or problems that cut across primary systems. So that kind of summarizes what Tom says in concise language that you can cite in the RFPA.
I'll jump in on the middle question. There's a question about, is this the only webinar, and can you contact us with questions? Yes, it is the only webinar, but there will be the recording available so you can revisit and you can look at the information that's in the slides again. And yes, we have our contact information in there so that you can contact us with questions. We do expect, before you do that, that you have thoroughly read and digested the RFPA, so that if the answers are in there, you've looked for them. And if you have emailed us already and you haven't heard back, just try again. It's possible that somehow they got lost in the shuffle. All three of us actually have had like COVID or various issues over the past couple of months. And so, just send us another message.
There's a question about AI extension replacing the extension component of a CAP project. Anything that you do, just justify it. If you make a solid case, the reviewers will look at that. So this is not something that we can answer. You'll need to do the justification in your proposal.
That's what Jessica said is right, but I would caution you that agriculture is one of the most conservative enterprises that we engage in. And so trying to replace humans with, artificial intelligence or, things like that, you have to look at what is the acceptance going to be? Is that really how people want to get their information? It may be that's part of your extension process. But remember that everybody learns differently. So you don't want to just approach it from one one angle. You want to have multiple ways that people can get the information from the project and make use of it. So a lot of times I would say that the agricultural community it's not getting younger because I think it's getting younger by attrition because so many people are retiring. But we do see that younger farmers are more inclined to get their information, like while they're, like they're still driving tractors, but while they're in the cab of the tractor, they're on their smartphone and they're getting information off the internet and they're sending data to their to their databases and all that kind of stuff. So they're more savvy with the technology. But there are still a lot of people in the industry that rely on the more traditional approaches to extension.
If anyone on this call has a project that really focuses on AI and you're looking at SCRI and you're thinking, this might not be a perfect fit, look at some of the AFRI programs. We have a few AFRI programs that focus on AI, on data science. So that might be another place to look.
question about what are the challenges for small businesses to be the main awardee. Largely, it is in the grant support system. So a lot of universities and we've received feedback from some smaller institutions where their grant support system is not as robust as some of the larger institutions that really have a research focus. And so that's really the main the main drawback. It's not insurmountable, and it mostly comes about if it's not really in the application evaluation phase. It's more in the getting it submitted on time, making sure that everything is in a PDF, that that you meet all of the requirements, the administrative requirements. There are specialists at universities that's what they do, and their applicants submit those. The applications, like some of them require a month, so that they can go over them with a fine-tooth comb and make sure that everything is the way it should be. And so that's really the biggest challenge for small businesses, that especially where like maybe you're a business of 10 people or 5 people, and you don't so you're busy doing your business. You can't so that's a lot of times it's I often encourage people to hire a grant writer, because they can really be important in the process. Megan, you had your hand up. Did you want to add to that?
Oh, I was just going to emphasize that, if you are a small business, submitting, engage with grants.gov very early, because you need to get registered with them. And sometimes that can take much longer than you would think it would.
So it can take a
weeks.
month. It can take a month to get registered with grants.gov.
Right.
And that's where a lot of small businesses fail, is that they just go to grants.gov and think they're going to submit on the day, of the deadline, and that just doesn't happen. So SCRI funding is permanent, so that it is guaranteed each year, unless Congress says no, you can't have the money anymore. They can do that in appropriations, but SCRI is got a lot of support with our stakeholders and in Congress, so I don't anticipate that will happen. Megan's typing an answer to the RFP.
I'm just typing in that it's on the page where you registered for this webinar. That's where the RFA is.
The RFPA is there. Yeah, so the request for proposals, or RFA, request for applications, I think we have a link.
Okay, well, if that's a request for the full RFA, there's a copy of the previous year's RFA on the SCRI program page. So if you go to the NIFA website and you search for the Specialty Crop Research Initiative, there's the funding opportunity page, but there's also a page that has information about the program. And in there, you're also going to see a bunch of previously funded projects highlighted. And at the bottom of the page, there is a list of resources. Amongst those is a copy of the FY23 RFA. I have it on my list to get that updated so that it'll be the FY24 RFA, but they're very similar. It gives you an idea of what that RFA is going to look like.
And I just dropped a link to that page that Megan
you.
mentioned, that you have to scroll down to the bottom to see. But it's there.
There's a question about do all co-PIs or co-PDs need to be registered in grants.gov? No, only one person needs to be registered, and that's what they do at the university, right? They have one person that's registered, and they submit all the applications for the university. So it's just one registration that's required, and that's just to be able to get into the system, to access the forms and access the information that's in grants.gov. And just remember, please, everything has to be in a PDF. Grants.gov does not require you to submit PDFs. So they're not going to say, oh, we're not going to accept this. They'll accept it, but our system at NIFA, everything comes to us as individual files, and then we put the packages together internally. And so if it's not in a PDF, we don't recognize it, and so it doesn't get attached. And so then the reviewer looks at it and says, "Oh, there's no stakeholder relevant statement here." Well, that's because you didn't put it in as a PDF. So make sure that you do that. That is really one of the most important. Making the deadline is important also.
Okay, seems like maybe we should wrap up at this point, and direct people to go look at the RFPA. A lot of the answers to questions are in there. And then if you can't figure something out, feel free to reach out to us.
And I would just say this: the best way to do that, send us an email and propose a time when we can talk. More than happy to pick up the phone and because a lot of times it's easier to just I can give you an answer in 5 minutes where it might take me a half an hour to do it by email. But reach out to us first, because we're not just sitting around waiting for you to call. And so it's best that when we can figure out a time that's mutually a mutual opportunity. So all right.
And I put a link to the page where you can have access to that RFPA, to where you're going to find the recording to this technical assistance webinar, etc., in the chat. But Megan is correct. It is where you went to register for this webinar.
Yep. Okay. Seeing no more questions, have a great day, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.